In the early 13th century, long before he became one of the most beloved saints in Christian history, Francis of Assisi lived in a small community of brothers near a humble chapel called the Portiuncula. It was here, among the forests and fields of Umbrian countryside, that an event took place which the early friars never forgot. A moment so quiet, so hidden, that it was almost lost to time. Yet it revealed more about Francis' heart than any public miracle. This is the documented night when Francis heard a cry no one else could hear. Winter in central Italy can be harsh, cold winds crossing the plains, night settling early over the valley, and frost coating the ground by dusk. The brothers of Francis' small community lived with almost nothing. Their shelter was little more than a wooden hut, their blankets thin, their meals simple. But what they lacked in comfort, they believed they made up for in devotion. Every night, after the final prayer of Compline, the friars would lie down on layers of straw and rest as best they could. Yet among them was one man who did not rest. Brother Morico. A newcomer to the brotherhood, Morico carried a private sorrow. Historical accounts describe him as gentle, devout, and willing, yet weighed down by a deep inner heaviness that no one fully understood. Some say he had endured family tragedy. Others believed he held guilt from his past. Whatever the reason, Morico struggled with one belief: that God had abandoned him. On this particular winter night, while the rest of the brothers slowly drifted to sleep, Morico lay awake. The wind slipped through gaps in the wooden boards, and the single candle on the far side of the room flickered as if fighting to stay alive. Morico pressed his hands to his chest. According to early Franciscan writings, he felt an overwhelming darkness, a spiritual emptiness he could not name. He feared that his prayers went unheard, that God saw his failures more clearly than his intentions. And that the silence he felt inside was not a trial, but a punishment. But he did not speak. He did not wake anyone. He did not ask for help. He simply cried, quietly, silently, tears falling into the straw beneath him. Across the room, however, someone was still awake. Francis, thin, weakened by fasting and years of physical suffering, remained kneeling in prayer long after the others had settled. This was not unusual. The brothers often found him praying through the night, whispering the names of those he carried in his heart. But on this night, something changed. Francis suddenly stopped. He lifted his head. And according to his earliest companions, he felt a kind of spiritual pressure, a heaviness that did not belong to him. Later he would explain it this way: love hears what the ear cannot. Something had stirred in the room. Not sound. Not movement. But suffering. A quiet, muffled cry that no human ear could detect, yet which Francis felt as clearly as if it had been shouted. He rose to his feet. Francis began moving slowly among the sleeping brothers. His steps were careful, almost reverent. He paused beside each man, as if listening, not to their breathing, but to their hearts. And then he reached Morico. The young friar lay curled, trembling, eyes squeezed shut. His body was silent, but his soul was not. His grief radiated like cold air around him. Francis knelt beside him. Historical sources preserve Francis' first words in a simple phrase: "Brother Morico, why do you weep alone?" Morico startled awake, shocked and embarrassed. He tried to wipe his tears, tried to hide his face, but Francis gently held his hands. "What weighs on your heart?" the saint asked. And for the first time in months, Morico allowed himself to speak. Morico explained that he felt spiritually abandoned, that despite his prayer and devotion, God seemed distant, unreachable, silent. He watched the other brothers pray with peace and joy, but he felt only turmoil. He feared he was unworthy of God's love. That his past mistakes prevented forgiveness. That perhaps even God himself had turned away from him. Francis listened without interruption. His response was quiet, measured, and deeply compassionate. He told Morico, "The love of God does not come when you feel worthy. It comes when you feel empty, so that he may fill you." Francis was known to teach that spiritual dryness was not a sign of abandonment, but of transformation. A phase where God withdraws emotional sweetness, not his presence, so that a soul learns to love him in truth, not only in comfort. He placed his hand over Morico's heart and said, "This pain you feel is not God leaving you. It is your heart longing for him." Francis then did something unexpected. He took Morico by the hand and led him outside into the cold winter night. The sky above the portiuncula was clear, scattered with countless stars. Frost covered the ground, sparkling under the moonlight. Francis pointed to the horizon. "Brother," he said, "do you see the darkness? It cannot stop the coming of dawn." He continued, "So it is with God. When he seems far, he is preparing light you have not yet seen." It was a lesson Morico had never heard before. That spiritual darkness is not failure, but invitation. In that moment of honesty beneath the winter sky, Morico revealed the wound at the center of his despair. He carried guilt over an unresolved conflict with a family member who had died before reconciliation. He believed he had failed love, and therefore, that God had nothing left to offer him. Francis' answer was simple. God forgives where we cannot. And he heals the place in us where grief becomes fear. He emphasized a truth still repeated today. The heart breaks, so that grace can enter. The brothers later testified that when Morico returned inside, something about him had changed. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but subtly, like the first light of dawn creeping over the hills. He prayed differently, more slowly, more honestly. He no longer hid his wounds. He allowed himself to walk the difficult path of healing, with Francis guiding him step by step. And Francis, for his part, prayed for Morico every night, asking God to restore what sorrow had taken. This quiet event, no visions, no public spectacle, no miraculous cure, became one of the early Franciscan community's most treasured memories. It revealed the depth of Francis' compassion, not only for the poor and the sick, but for the unseen wounds, the silent tears, the hidden despair that so often goes unnoticed. The friars would later summarize the night with a simple phrase. Francis heard a cry the world could not hear. But Francis himself clarified what truly happened. It was Christ who heard, and Christ who sent me. Centuries later, the story remains a powerful reminder. Not all miracles are loud. Not all signs come in brightness. Sometimes, the greatest act of God is simply sending someone who listens deeply, tenderly, and without judgment, until the light returns. What happened that night was not just a moment of forgiveness. It was a reminder of something we all forget far too easily, that healing rarely arrives the way we expect it. Sometimes it does not come through answers, or explanations, or even justice, but through presence. The man had prayed for years, begging God to ease the weight he carried. He thought God was silent. He thought heaven had forgotten him. Yet all along, grace was moving toward him, quietly, slowly, patiently, until the exact moment he was finally able to receive it. Saint Francis didn't lecture him. He didn't correct him. He didn't remind him of his failures or demand that he try harder. He simply placed a hand on his shoulder, the gentlest gesture, but one strong enough to break open a heart that had been locked in grief for years. And that is often how God works. Not in lightning, not in miracles we can see, but in quiet things. A touch, a word, a moment, a presence we did not expect. Perhaps that is why the man wept the way he did. He realized that love had been pursuing him even when he stopped pursuing God. He realized that forgiveness is not something we achieve. It is something we receive. When Saint Francis walked back into the night, the man did not suddenly become holy. His life did not become easy. His wounds did not disappear. But for the first time, he understood something life-changing. God had never abandoned him. It was his despair that made it hard to see. And forgiveness, even forgiveness of himself, was still possible. We carry our wounds for so long that we think they become part of who we are. But this story reminds us of a grace far greater than our fear. A grace that knocks on doors we closed long ago. A grace that reaches into places we don't show anyone. A grace that waits for us, even when we stop waiting for it. And sometimes, all it takes is one night. One unexpected moment of mercy. To bring a heart back to life.